Sorry, I just realized mic is muted. Okay, thank you for commenting. I'll just go back and repeat. So, um, initially we discussed, before we delved into the fiqh, the author chose to begin with a few pages on aqidah, on manhaj. Um, I thought we were still reading. No. Um, sorry. So he decided to start with a few pages on Aqidah and on Manhaj. And right now, the very last page before we delve into the actual fiqh is a short page on Usul al-Fiqh. And so uh, he discusses the five legal rulings. And as I was saying while I was muted, those of you who attended um, the first few lessons of al-Waraqat, the recordings of which are on YouTube, I advise you to, if you were there, you would know the detail I went into. If you were not there, I advise you to go back and repeat that video. Uh, I won't go into that much detail right now, simply for time's sake. But I strongly advise to go back and watch the recording on the five legal rulings. So, without further delay, um, قال المصنف رحمه الله باب في أركان الإسلام, a section on the pillars of Islam. And he says the famous hadith by Ibn Umar, the son of Umar ibn Khattab, radiallahu anhu. He narrates that the Prophet ﷺ said, Islam is built upon five: Shahadat an la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammad Rasulullah, testifying the Shahada and the prayers, and giving zakah, fasting in Ramadan, and Hajj. When Ibn Umar was narrating this hadith, the Sahaba and the Tabi'un, the people around him, one of them asked, why did the Prophet ﷺ not include jihad? And Ibn Umar said, I do not know. I simply heard it as it is. It's okay. Apologies. So they asked him why jihad is not included in this hadith. This question and the answer display two things. First of which is the famous characteristic of Ibn Umar, which is following the Sunnah to the letter and being extra, some might say, a little too strict in following the Sunnah specifically. Many stories and many things are narrated from him, to the extent that Ibn Umar, for example, would, when walking in a street that the Prophet ﷺ would walk in, he would, stand, put his feet in the same places that he saw him put his feet in. So he was extremely, I'm not sure if the English word zealous is the correct translation, but he was very strict in following the hadiths and very strict in narrating them as well, which is why Ibn Umar is one of the strongest narrators, and Imam Bukhari includes him in the famous golden chain of narration, which is what Imam Malik narrated from Nafi', who narrated from Abdullah ibn Umar. This is considered the strongest chain of hadith by Imam al-Bukhari. The second thing it displays is the importance of jihad in the minds of the early generations. When the five pillars of Islam are mentioned, and they are confused why jihad is not mentioned amongst them, it displays the level of importance that jihad had, that correctly has in Islam, but in the modern times is brushed away by certain people and ignored by certain scholars for whatever reasons. Some of the muhaddithun and fuqaha, when they're explaining this hadith, they say that jihad is not included for a specific reason, which is that jihad does not apply to as many people as the five pillars do. So jihad does not apply to, or is not obligatory to women, to slaves, in the vast majority of cases. There are specific cases where it would be obligatory upon everyone, such as if the enemy invaded the city, it would be obligatory on anyone within that city, slave or not slave, woman or not woman. And nobody, a wife would not need the permission of her husband. A slave does not need the permission of his master, and the people in general do not need the permission of uh, the Wali al-Amr, the leader of the city. But in general cases, it is not obligatory amongst most people. Interestingly, another hadith very similar to the hadith of the five pillars of Islam mentions 8 shares of Islam. This hadith is not, for whatever reason, is not as famous as the hadith of the five pillars. And the hadith goes that Islam has 8 shares, or in Arabic, ashum. These 8 shares are the five pillars of Islam. So the Prophet ﷺ said, the Islami, and the wording I'm narrating is not precise, but Islam has 8 shares. So الشهادة في سبيل الشهادة أن لا إله إلا الله سهم والصلاة سهم. So shahada is a sahm, is a share. Salah is a share. الصيام سهم. الحج سهم. وصيام رمضان سهم. So these are, he mentions the five pillars of Islam as each one being a share of Islam. And then he mentions والجهاد في سبيل الله سهم. And jihad is a share of Islam. And then the last two, وَالْأَمْرُ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ سَهْمٌ وَالنَّهْيُ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ سَهْمٌ. So enjoining good and forbidding what is evil, these are the last two. So in a different hadith of 8 shares of Islam, we have 5 pillars of Islam that make up the first 5 shares, and then the last 3 are jihad fi sabilillah and enjoining what is good and forbidding what is evil. And then in the end of the hadith, it is said, whoever does not do any amongst them has no share of Islam. So these are 8 shares of Islam. Ideally, a Muslim would do all, he would have all the shares of Islam. But he says, whoever has not done any amongst them, he has no share in Islam. And that is the section on the pillars of Islam. And here we are at the legal rulings again. I advise you to go back and revise the waraqat recordings because, as I discussed there, these 5 legal rulings are a bare minimum so that the rulings make sense, so that you can study fiqh. You can study fiqh fine, knowing only these 5 rulings and the standard definition. But if you really want to have a deeper understanding of some of the more intricate matters of difference of opinion within the school, you would need to know some of the more delicate terminologies that are not included within these 5. They give you a deeper understanding of why some fuqaha would disagree with each other. Even though their opinions are extremely similar, it's a matter of delicate terminology. Similarly, I discussed in the recording how these standard definitions are not always the best way to define them. And I discussed the reasons in the recording. Again, I can't go into much detail because of time's sake, but the recording is there and I strongly advise anyone to go back and watch it. So, اعلم وفقك الله, know, may Allah give you success, that the rulings in Islam are 5. عليها تدور أعمال المكلف. Amongst these 5 are the actions of the mukallaf, of the person who is charged with following the Sharia. And he defines the mukallaf, وهو البالغ العاقل. He is the person of age and of sound mind. And again, I'll repeat a detail I mentioned in the waraqat lessons, is that the Malikiyya, and differently than many of the other schools, have the opinion that people who are not of age, of children, they are mukallafin. However, they are not mukallafeen with wajib and haram. So children are not charged with following haram and wajib. However, they are charged with what is recommended and what is disliked. So they will receive um, reward for doing what is liked. They won't receive punishment for leaving it because it is recommended. And similarly for disliked, they are charged with it because doing the disliked will not give you punishment. However, leaving the wajib, leaving the obligatory, something that is punishable, and therefore they are not charged with it, and doing something that is haram is punishable, and therefore they are not charged with it. So the first one, al-wajib, what is obligatory? هو الذي يثاب فاعله ويعاقب تاركه. It is the thing that the one who does it is rewarded and the one who leaves it is punished. كالصلوات الخمس, like the five prayers, وبر الوالدين وغير ذلك من واجبات, such as the five prayers and uh, being dutiful to the parents and other wajibat. والمندوب, what is recommended? Uh, the more precise English definition of mandub is mandated, because what is recommended, what is mandub, is technically there is an amr, there is a command to do it, but leaving this command is not punishable. So it is the thing that the person who does it is rewarded, and the person who leaves it is not punished. كنافلة الظهر, such as the sunnah prayer or the nafila prayer of dhuhr. وصيام ثلاثة أيام من كل شهر, and fasting 3 days from each month. The fasting of the white days, the sunnah of doing that, is a recommended action. وحرام وهو الذي يعاقب فاعله ويثاب تاركه. What is haram is the thing that the person who does it is punished, the person who leaves it, sorry, the person who does it is punished, the person who leaves it is rewarded. كالزنا وشرب الخمر وغير ذلك من المحرمات, such as zina, such as drinking alcohol and other forbidden things. Again, another detail not mentioned here is that it is important to note that the person who, we said leaving haram is rewardable. However, another word that has to be added is that leaving haram imtithalan. فَمَنْ تَرَكَ الْحَرَامِ imtithalan. Imtithal in Arabic means because of following, or um, because of actually seeking the Sharia. So the person who leaves zina, or another example, the person who leaves eating pork because it is haram is rewarded. However, the person who leaves eating pork simply because he doesn't like the smell, he's not rewarded. So the reward is only given for those who leave it if they are doing it for the sake of following the Sharia, not for the sake of their personal opinions. ومكروه. What is disliked? It is a thing that when you do it, you are not punished. However, when you leave it, you are rewarded. Such as wearing al-khaz or khiz. It's a certain type of cloth that is similar to silk but not silk. It is makruh because of its similarity. وأكل لحم السباع, eating the meat of the canine animals, such as lions, dogs, cats, wolves, these things. The what is most commonly cited as the Malik opinion is that these are disliked, therefore it is makruh. وغير ذلك من المكروهات. ومباح, the last one, وهو الذي ليس في فعله ولا في تركه ثواب ولا عقاب كأكل لحم الضأن. Mubah is something that there is no reward or punishment for leaving it or doing it, such as eating the meat of goats or sheep. لبس الكتان, wearing كتان. Katan is, I'm not sure what it is in English. It's a similar to wool. It's a plant-based cloth. وغير ذلك من المباحات. So again, I won't go into all the details of these rulings. One thing I will mention is that makruh is divided into two. Why is it divided into two? There is a famous rule in usul al-fiqh, in the principles of fiqh. الأمر بالشيء نهي عن ضده. Commanding one thing is forbidding its opposite. Practically, if I tell you to do something, I obligate you to do something, such as praying 5 times a day. By necessity, by just logical necessity, I've forbidden you from not praying 5 times a day. It goes the same, vice versa. If I forbid you from eating pork, by logical necessity, I've obligated you to not eat pork. So for every obligation, there's necessarily a haram thing, which is the opposite of the obligatory thing, and vice versa. Now, the wajib is the thing that, so this is one definition, the standard definition, which is based on reward and punishment. Another way of defining these rulings is to say that al-wajib is something that has been commanded with insistence, and that the recommended action is something that has been commanded without insistence. So we have two commands and two Arabic called amr and nahi. Nahi is a command, but in the negative, so it's forbidding. Amr is to do something, nahi is to not do something. So we have 4 commands, 2 regarding doing them, obligatory and recommended, and 2 regarding leaving them, which is haram and disliked. So if we're commanding to do something, the opposite is haram. If we are commanding something without insistence, by necessity, the opposite of it is disliked. So when I tell you to do something recommended, I tell you to do something without insistence, the opposite of that is to, so for example, I tell you to, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you to recite athkar, say subhanallah after the obligatory prayer. This is something you will be rewarded for doing, but you won't be punished for not doing it. The opposite of that, by necessity, is makruh. What does that mean? To not do these recommended actions, will you be punished for it? No. Will you be rewarded for not doing it? Yes, you will be rewarded for not leaving them. You will be rewarded for not leaving them because the action itself is rewardable, right? So I realize this might be confusing to follow for the first time. An action is recommended. You won't be punished for leaving it. Leaving this recommended action is not punishable. However, leaving the action is recommended because leaving the action is doing the recommended action. It's a double negative. So what's the problem here? The problem is we said that makruh, what is disliked, is something that has been commanded or commanded to leave without insistence. This poses a problem because that means that every time you are not doing a recommended action, you're doing something makruh, you're doing something you've been told not to do. So the fuqaha took makruh and divided it into 2. The first section is something that is makruh because it is makruh. There's a hadith or a verse or something that tells you not to do this. The second section is what we call خلاف الأولى, which means the opposite of what is a priority. خلاف الأولى. So الأولى is priority. خلاف الأولى is not doing the priority. Makruh is something that is makruh for itself, and خلاف الأولى has the exact same definition of makruh, exact same punishment, exact same reward. However, it is not makruh because of itself. It is makruh because it is the opposite of a recommended action. So leaving the recommended action is the opposite of the priority. The priority is always to do recommended action. The opposite of this, the opposite of the recommended action is makruh, but we don't call it makruh. Okay, I'm going to stop just for this point because I realize it might be confusing to follow through with that. If there's any questions about the specific idea, I want to get it across before we continue. Otherwise, we'll dive right into the next section. You can speak up on the mic if it is better.
Alhamdulillah, clear, Sheikh.
Okay. Again, just very brief introduction. These 5 legal rulings. There's so much details to go into them. The Shafi'is add more legal rulings. The Hanafis add more legal rulings. And knowing these 5 are the basics to actually knowing the rulings. When you're going through your own fiqh book, you will be able to understand them. But going into advanced levels and then trying to read a Hanafi book or a Shafi'i book, or even a Maliki book from a different region, for example, they will all discuss usul al-fiqh in using different words. So it might be confusing for someone doing personal research later on if you have not nailed down these details, which you should in your study of usul al-fiqh. كتاب الطهارة والصلاة, the first book of fiqh after I don't know, 5 lessons, 6 lessons. The fuqaha always begin their books either with tahara or with salah, purification or prayer, due to the importance of salah amongst all the legal rulings. Similarly, most hadith books will begin with this. They will either begin with salah and tahara, or they will begin with iman. But Imam Malik famously in his Muwatta begins with the prayer timings. That is the first section in the Muwatta. And so all the fiqh books begin with salah. In Khalil, Mukhtasar Khalil and al-Salik, it goes straight into water, what type of water you're allowed to use to make wudu, to make ghusl. Tadrib al-Salik reorganizes it a slight bit and starts with the conditions of prayer before going into each condition on its own. He says, اعلم أن الصلاة لها شروط. Know that prayer has conditions. What is the definition of condition in fiqh? الشرط, a condition, multiple shurut, is something sorry, I'm just blanking on the sentence. الشروط, a condition is something that the absence of it necessitates absence. I think we may have gone into this during the lessons on al-Akhdari last year. But if there's anyone new or someone who has forgotten, a shart is something that the absence of it necessitates absence. So if prayer has a condition, the absence of this condition necessitates absence. For example, tahara, wudu, being in a state of purification is a condition for salah. The absence of being in a state of tahara necessitates the absence of salah. Now there's more details in terms of the types of conditions. There are conditions for obligation. There are conditions for correctness. Shart wujub. A shart for something being wajib, being obligatory, means that, again, let's go back to the definition. The absence necessitates absence. So if something is a condition for obligation, that means that the absence of this condition necessitates the absence of obligation. So if someone, let's go into the examples of the book right away. منها ما يتوقف عليه وجوب. Some of these conditions, obligation rests upon them. وهو البلوغ, being of age. So if someone is not of age, so the age is absent. Being of age is absent. That means the obligation of salah is absent. وعدم الإكراه على تركها. So the two conditions of obligation for prayer are being of age and عدم الإكراه على تركها, not being forced to leave it. So someone who is, for example, is imprisoned by the enemy and he's not being allowed to pray, by force or whatever means, it is not obligatory upon him because he is unable to do it. ومنها ما يتوقف عليه الصحة. So there are other conditions on which correctness rests upon it. So the correctness rests upon these conditions. وهو طهارة الحدث, being in a state of purification from incidents such as urination, passing gas. These are all ahdath. We call them incidents, which we also discussed in al-Akhbari. Not being in a state of purification from them necessitates the absence of the sihha, the correctness of the prayer. So the prayer, not being in a state of tahara does not necessitate the absence of obligation. You're still obligated. What is absent here is sihha, validity of the prayer. وطهارة الخبث, being in a state of purification from khabath. Khabath are actual tangible impurities, such as if you step in, the defecation of a dog and it's stuck to you, that is khabath, that is a physical impurity. Similarly, urine on the clothes, alcohol being spilled, all of these are physical impurities. Now, the correctness of the prayer when there are physical impurities on you is not absolute, which we're going to get into this in a later section, but it is restrained to being knowledgeable about it and being able to remove it. So if you have alcohol on your clothes, but you are unable to remove it, and it's the only thing you have at the moment, and you are allowed to pray with it. So these are not absolute. We're going to go into the details of all of these later on, section by section. وستر العورة. The other condition for validity is to cover the awra, cover the private parts and the places that are obligatory to cover. استقبال القبلة, facing the direction of Mecca. Again, this is not unrestrained. It is based on your knowledge. If you are lost in the desert, you can pray to wherever you choose. فإنما تولوا فثم وجه الله والإسلام وترك المبطلات. So, Islam is a condition of validity. So if a Christian were to pray salah, if a Christian were to stand with he does the wudu and he prays towards Mecca and he does takbir and he reads Fatiha, he does everything, his prayer is still invalid. وَتَرْكُ الْمُبْطِلَاتِ, leaving the things that end prayer, such as talking during prayer, such as eating during prayer, anything that uh, ruins the state of prayer, it is a condition of validity to leave them. So we have a total of 2 conditions of obligation and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 conditions of validity. Now, when you read different books, they don't always give you the same division. Sometimes the actual knowledge is the same, but the way they divide it, the way they word it, they might categorize it a little differently. So somewhere it might be 6, somewhere it might be 8. Sometimes they move something from here to there. Sometimes they don't categorize all of these within shurut, within conditions. They add another thing, which is asbab, sabab. So sometimes it's called a sabab, sometimes it's called shart, wujub, wa sihha. So we have conditions for obligation, conditions for validity. Sometimes we have both of them combined, which is down here. A condition for obligation and validity together. So sometimes these categories, different authors will move them around a bit, but the actual contents are the same. So it doesn't matter to memorize that there's 2 conditions of wujub or 6 for sahha. What is important is to know all of them on their own. To know all these conditions as on their own without listing them into categories or knowing how much is in each category. So what are the conditions that both validity and obligation rest upon together? So al-aql, being of sound mind. If you are not of sound mind, then if you pray, the prayer is not valid because you have no way of making niyyah, you have no way of making your intention. It is not obligatory upon you, and even if you do it, it is not valid. So both obligation and validity. Dukhul al-waqt, the time of the prayer entering. It is not obligatory to pray dhuhr before dhuhr, and if you do it, it is not valid. Being pure from a state of menstruation and postpartum bleeding. It is not obligatory upon these women to pray, and even if they do, it is not valid. وَالْقُدْرَةُ عَلَى اسْتِعْمَالِ الْمَاءِ الصَّيْدِ, being capable of using water or soil or dirt or rocks for tayammum. So if you are not capable of making wudu, you make tayammum. If you are not capable of making tayammum as well, then the prayer is not obligatory upon you. And even if you do it, it is not valid. And this is a matter of disagreement within the madhab, and it's going to come in great detail later on. Again, we touched upon this mas'ala within al-Akhbari. You can go back and review because I think it'll be a few pages, quite a few lessons before we get to some of these sections. That is the end of this page on conditions of prayer. If anyone, I think the Zoom will end very soon. So if anyone has any questions, please do not hesitate to ask in any way you see fit. جزاكم الله خيرا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.